Welcome everyone joining from around the world. This promises to be an exciting 3 days where we will deep dive into the catalysts that are reshaping the business of technology. I'm Philippa Layton-Jones.
And I'm Willem Marks. We're looking forward to having you join conversations in breakouts like these on the main stage and on the spotlight stage with leading thinkers across critical topics like the new workplace, how AI is enhancing creativity, and the next generation of consumer electronics. One of the biggest themes in technology this year has, of course, been the accelerated digital transformation spurred on by the pandemic.
And we're delighted to welcome NTT Data's Aaron Millstone to share his insights on where we have landed in digital after a year of unprecedented accelerated transformation. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you both. Appreciate you having me.
Aaron, it's great to see you. And we all talked a lot about the rapid trend to digitization when the pandemic was called. But can you tell us, what are the most pronounced ways in which digital has accelerated over the last 18 months?
Sure. Digital has pushed to the absolute edge of everything. Digital is pervasive and it's everywhere. COVID did more for digital in 18 months than most boardrooms have done in the last 20 years. Here are some facts. E-commerce had been growing at roughly 1% per year since being introduced in the early 2000s. Then in 2020, online shopping jumped 10% in the first few weeks of lockdowns. This is the equivalent of jumping forward in time by 10 years of growth. Streaming movies and TV shows grew their subscribers by 26% in 2020. Online groceries went from novelty to now occupying 10% of all grocery revenues. Instacart was quoted as saying they saw 5 years of growth in 5 weeks. Peloton entered people's homes and took market share from traditional gyms, with triple-digit increases in Peloton's revenues. They aren't a bike company with an iPad attached to it. They are a digital content fitness platform with bikes as one of their product channels. Zoom became a verb and made locations irrelevant. I Zoom to work. My kids Zoom to school. We all Zoom to visit relatives, attend weddings, funerals, and virtual doctor's appointments. Zoom's paying customers base grew almost 500% in 2020. Even my company, NTT Data Services, was challenged by our clients to help create services we could not have imagined 2 years ago. For example, we helped to enable digitalization of lower income people in New York City. We enabled remote learning for 1.1 million students and teachers, including provisioning hundreds of thousands of donated iPads for distribution to homeless services and the New York City Housing Authority. The financial markets have also reacted. There was a huge shift in capital to companies that get digital. Look at Apple. It took them over 40 years to get to a $1 trillion market cap, and in 2020, they crossed $2 trillion in market cap in a matter of 5 months. The last 18 months have accelerated digital transformations by between 5 and 10 years, and has pushed these experiences into our home in completely unprecedented ways.
Aaron, one of the things that you talk about is digital not being a technology problem. What exactly do you mean by that?
Sure. Digital is simply technology. It doesn't fix an inefficient or bad business model. Let's talk about the car rental market as an example. We have traditional car rental companies like Avis, Budget, or Hertz in the US, where they have fleets of hundreds of thousands of cars and a business model that assumes most of the cars are rented and out on the road. Compare that model to Uber or Lyft. These companies provide a rental technology platform, but don't own a single car of their own. All of these companies invested in great digital platforms and user experiences to simplify the rental process for customers. They all have great apps you can download on the iPhone App Store. However, no matter how much money traditional car rental companies are willing to throw at the digital technology, their underlying business model is in trouble. They simply can't reduce their costs fast enough to match the revenue when a major catastrophe hits. Digital won't fix this.
So Aaron, let me pick up on what Willem asked then. What are companies doing wrong when they approach digital transformation as just an IT problem?
I think the biggest mistake companies make in this space is that they never get away from massive amounts of technical debt. So when I say technical debt, that's a word that means sort of everything and nothing. But in this case, I'm referring to legacy code, applications, data, and infrastructure that have been built up over decades and decades, and they're absorbing the majority of a company's IT talent and dollars to simply keep the lights on. A great example of technical debt are the incredibly large system of record, finance, HR, supply chain systems that were designed, built, and rolled out with global templates over the last 40 to 50 years, typically in really large $100 million plus expensive programs. Once those programs were done, IT departments still had to care and feed for those systems with upgrades and patches. They had to pay really large support bills to the software vendors, and they had to maintain any custom code they had added. And here's the kicker. This used to be the cost of doing business. This used to be a massive differentiator. Companies are spending upwards of 90% of their IT budgets keeping this type of technical debt up and running. These same dollars need to be rebalanced into more innovation and new capabilities. The reality is technical debt is really, really hard to solve, and it's distracting for most companies. Traditional data centers are still only 15 to 20% migrated to the public cloud. 70% of Fortune 1000 companies still have mainframes. This stuff is really hard to solve for, and it distracts from overarching business strategies.
And so, Aaron, on that, I mean, how do these large companies that have so much of their data still stored on their mainframes, they haven't yet transitioned as much of that data as they want to the clouds? How difficult is that for them to try and transition without, you're running at the same time as you're trying to completely reconvert your entire business proposition? How do you do that simultaneously?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard question. So Gartner introduced a concept around 2012 called bimodal IT, which was this idea that IT departments had two different types of systems they had to support. Systems of record, which are those big monolithic finance, HR, supply chain, mainframe systems we just talked about, and then systems of interaction or engagement. If systems of record focused on standardizing the processes for companies, systems of interaction focused on removing friction in how a company interacts with humans. Gartner's view was that each of these modes required completely different speeds of operation and support, one slow and one fast. I think many companies struggle to get the right balance between these two modes. And now, here we are with most businesses also aware of, and in many cases actively investing in, the looming threat or opportunity of artificial intelligence and machine learning. If Gartner thought that systems of interaction required fast IT capabilities, artificial intelligence and machine learning requires light speed capabilities. Getting a digital strategy right requires aligning investment across all three areas: system of record, systems of interaction, and what I call systems of intelligence, or the AI ML systems. And of course, this strategy must be aligned with the business strategy to drive true transformation. So to answer your question, right, the best motion a company can make is to reduce their spend on technical debt by moving legacy workloads to the public cloud as fast as possible. Take the savings from doing this and reallocate the budget back into artificial intelligence, machine learning, while continuing to also simplify the customer, employee, partner, supplier, citizen, if you're a government, experience. And this effectively takes Gartner's bimodal IT model and evolves it into a trimodal IT model. We're seeing more of our clients start to move down this path. As a recent example, we helped the United States Air Force transform a 50-year-old legacy mainframe critical supply chain application by moving it to a cloud. This reduced their technical debt by saving more than $25 million in annual mainframe hosting costs alone. And those savings were then reinvested in the application, migrating from COBOL to Java. And now they've got a logistics platform that supports the U.S. military missions in real time.
Aaron, how different is this sector by sector, industry by industry? Some industries rely on a lot more hardware CapEx than others. How do you differentiate between the requirements that different sectors have when it comes to this kind of digital transformation, reducing this, what you call digital debt?
Yeah, certain industries are wide open for digital transformation, and they've been lagging. Quite honestly, COVID was a great accelerator to catch them up. So, the example I'd give you is healthcare. Somewhere around, 18 plus months ago, you couldn't go, in the US at least, to see a virtual doctor visit and have insurance companies pay for that without a bunch of exceptions. Now, right, I visited my doctor at the Cleveland Clinic using Zoom technologies just 2 weeks ago and got a prescription as a result of it. So I think it's more common in some industries, and they're more accepting, certainly as the world had to go into some type of lockdown. But it's absolutely true, right? Different industries vary in terms of what they can do, and different industries have invested heavily in different technologies. Financial services, for example, have huge investments in mainframe technologies to provide core banking systems and core banking services. So, each industry has to approach this based on the constraints of their industry, but they're all moving sort of inexorably towards this same end state.
Is there a sort of silver bullet we can think about that cuts across industry lines, that as an approach, as a technique, as a method, as a mindset makes sense regardless of the kind of business you're in?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I think there are, there's sort of three areas that I think digital transformation are going to evolve to over time, right? So one, we talked about already. There's certain industries that are now wide open for digital transformation. Healthcare being the largest in terms of revenue. If you imagine, right, this is sort of a fun thought exercise, but if you imagine Amazon focusing their digital and business reach into the healthcare market, Amazon knows more about its best customers than any insurance actuary could ever dream of knowing. Amazon knows your choices in groceries. Are you buying ice cream or are you buying vegetables? They know whether you buy fitness equipment or whether you're buying video games to sit at home on the couch. They know your clothing sizes. So who do you think is in a better position to offer you, really personalized health services, insurance rates, et cetera, right? So really Amazon, if you just project them into some of these industries, you can start to imagine what they could look like. I also believe that digital ecosystems will be a huge common growth area. In other words, bringing multiple businesses together to deliver better overall end-to-end services through digital technologies. So if I continue on with that Amazon Health example, so imagine your kids have come home from school and your son shows you a rash on his arm. You sign up for Amazon Health Plus with your Prime membership, and you have access to Amazon's network of doctors who aren't Amazon employees. The doctor accepts an immediate virtual appointment using the Amazon Show device in your living room. The doctor looks at the rash. She prescribes medicine that can be delivered to your home in an hour using Amazon's prescription and same-day delivery services. We're not really that far away from this type of digital disruption. And then finally, what I'll say is AI, artificial intelligence, everywhere. One of my favorite examples of this is from the beauty product company Avon, which is not necessarily a source you'd expect to see innovative artificial intelligence from. But in 2019, Avon launched a mascara designed by machine learning and artificial intelligence called True 5-in-1 Lash Genius Mascara. This mascara was developed based on analyzing the most desired lash benefits according to social media comments. And it went on to exceed the revenue expectations of Avon.
So, Aaron, what you've described there is some companies really grasping the nettle on this. How can companies get it right? Are there tips that they should be thinking about as they approach their digital strategy?
Sure. So I'd say after addressing technical debt, which again, most companies have massive amounts of technical debt, this really is going to be about ecosystems, partnerships, and innovation. If you're not actively disrupting lots of industries, like my Amazon example, you probably aren't Microsoft, Amazon, or Google. If you're not one of those companies, then the trick is going to be to compete alongside them. Companies, for the most part, are embracing multi-cloud strategies from what I see. They're also starting to select a group of partners, not vendors, that can work with them to reduce their technical debt, upskill their employees, modernize their legacy applications, bring innovation at the speed of startups, and really create data-driven AI platforms. I believe that the companies that really get this are going to quickly get to a trimodal IT foundation of systems of record, systems of interaction, systems of intelligence, combined with an ability to rapidly innovate.
And I want to stick with your future casting here and jump ahead, because technology moves very fast. Now, we know that the pandemic has been this great accelerator, But what will the next chapter of digital transformation look like, do you think?
Well, again, I think it's really going to come down to massive disruption in certain industries. I think we're going to see ecosystems come together to compete against those massive disruptions. I think we're going to start to see more and more oligopoly type of behaviors where you start to have really very much winner takes all in certain markets. I know from a digital perspective or from a business perspective, the merger and acquisition market is alive and very well. And we're seeing companies start to gobble up other companies in the market. And then finally, I do think AI is going to continue to be highly pervasive and out everywhere in almost every aspect of what we do and see, to the point where it starts to disappear into the background. Right? It'll be almost an unknown guiding force in terms of how we interact with companies, each other, governments, et cetera.
Aaron, traditionally we've had kind of a segregation between, say, the C-suite and IT departments at large corporations, and increasingly those lines are blurring. Do you forecast that CEOs, COOs, CTOs will be much, much more focused on that interaction inside companies in the future?
I do. I mean, I think there's a saying that came out and somewhere in the last decade or so that every company is a tech company. They might just not know it yet. I believe that's true, and I think you can see it in certain markets for sure, certain industries for sure. Again, I brought up financial services earlier. I think if you look at the financial services industries in Asia, for example, compared to the U.S., I think maybe they're a bit more advanced, and they think of themselves as technology companies with financial services components in the back end versus a financial services company with technology components that link it together. So I do think that strategically companies are orienting that way. I think you're seeing the creation of chief digital officer positions and chief data officer positions that exist outside of IT to really cross the different lines of business and bring solutions together across the business holistically. So I think you're seeing increasing motions where those lines are blurred. And then quite frankly, you have the hyperscalers of Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. Right, they're out disrupting industries holistically as features of their platforms, right? So I still am sort of amazed by this, but Amazon announced they're going to be buying Warner Brothers. I don't know if that'll go through from an antitrust perspective or whatever, whether it'll go through or not, but just the concept of saying, we're going to buy a studio in a different industry simply to add eyeballs and members to Amazon Prime, which will force them or cause them to buy more product. They're disrupting entire industries just to grow revenue base. So again, I think it's definitely, if not happening already, will be happening shortly.
And Aaron, you've talked about healthcare, you've talked about financial services. Are there other industries, other sectors that you think are more ripe for disruption that have not yet moved to this point, whereas some of the others are moving faster ahead of them? Government's the obvious one, so I won't necessarily touch on that because they've got their own sort of things they've got to work through, but I'll pick on manufacturing as an example. So, I think the manufacturing sector would benefit or could benefit hugely from artificial intelligence deployed everywhere within manufacturing processes. And I'll give you an example from a large chip manufacturer that I got to witness a few years ago. So they had deployed artificial intelligence inside of their manufacturing processes. As they produced chips, some of the chips had more defects than other chips. And the old way of manufacturing was they go through, they execute a set of tests, they find some of it, but a lot of defective chips would get shipped, or a lot of chips that would fail after a shorter period of time than the specs on the chip should have done. So they would ship those chips and then get them returned. They'd have unhappy customers. Well, they deployed artificial intelligence and sensors out into the manufacturing processes, and they deployed automated testing. And they were able to proactively identify the groups of chips that were going to fail ahead of time, and they could separate them out. And rather than discarding those chips, they actually bundled those chips as a net new product and sold a lower quality chip out to the market and added another $1 billion in revenue stream to their top line. So they took a negative, right? They used artificial intelligence to help solve for that, and then they turned it into a positive by creating a whole new product line out of it. So I think manufacturing, traditional ways of manufacturing, as they start to look at these things, I think AI, machine learning, sensors, IoT
all sorts of the digital buzzwords out there, I think could hugely help that industry as a whole.
And that's about finding opportunities that maybe we humans wouldn't recognize. Is that the key area potentially for manufacturing?
Right. So, I mean, obviously, I'm enamored with tech companies. I sit in the technical services space, right? So I love talking about it. And I do think the most obvious choice to look at innovation is in the big technology companies. But to your point, they don't always get it right. But they do have lots of capital, and they have huge product teams focused on achieving those innovations. So the example you just mentioned, the toilet paper example. So Amazon introduced a dash button in 2015, and it's one of my favorite examples to remind me that even the best innovations can just get it wrong. So in the case of Amazon dash buttons, right, these were single-purpose reorder buttons that connected to Wi-Fi and reordered whatever the button was programmed to reorder. So these were launched about the same time as virtual assistants started taking off in 2015. And the cost of the dash buttons far exceeded other ways of automatic reordering products, and Amazon canceled the dash button in 2019. But I do have a picture as my screensaver that reminds me not to push the digital customer experience too far without having a business model that really backs up what you're trying to do. And so the picture is of a dash button, a Charmin dash button over an empty roll of toilet paper. And obviously, if you've gotten to the end of a toilet paper roll and you've pressed the button to reorder Charmin, you're not really going to sit and wait for the same day or overnight delivery. So, right, the business model doesn't really match the digital solution at that point, right? So, again, I think looking to what those companies do, failing fast, which is what Amazon did with the dash button, is the right way to go. I do think also, Apple's a great company that's clearly an unbelievable innovator, and they're moving into new industries all the time, right? They just launched Apple Fitness Plus in 2020, and I gave you the statistic about Peloton earlier in the discussion. I think it's safe to say that Apple's going to take market share away from Peloton just based on Apple's fanatic customer base. Of course, Apple could simply buy Peloton instead of competing with them. And this would give him, this creates, you have to stretch the definition, but it gives you a wider assortment of wearables that Apple already sells. But more importantly, I think it gives them an edge into entering the health market, because how much further does Peloton or Apple Fitness have to go to start doing physical therapy services, for example? So I think the thing to watch out for here is that technology firms are going to continue to add features and innovations that disrupt all the established industries. And again, it doesn't really matter what the industry is. The real trick will be figuring out how to stay ahead of those disruptions or become parts of really large ecosystems to leverage big tech's investments. And likely it's some combination of both.
And so innovation is not necessarily just for tech companies. So tell us, how can a company that makes something pretty low tech, I'm thinking like toilet paper, right, which became, so scarce during the pandemic, how can they participate in the spirit of innovation that you've been talking about here?
Yeah, no, great question, and something I think about a lot. I would say that if you look at those big legacy technical debt data centers I was talking about, the historic conventional business wisdom was to outsource that, right? Go run that at the lowest possible price point. Take your talent and give it to offshore locations, give it to various third-party companies to just manage that and keep your costs as low as possible. With cloud and with digital and being sort of forefront, with AI, machine learning being forefront in most companies' strategies now, actually now technology is maybe one of the most strategic assets that a company can bring to bear in their business. And so we're seeing a motion for clients to start to co-source or in-source things that were previously outsourced. And so the real models that companies need to look at going forward is how do they upskill their talent, but also bring in partners that can work alongside their teams and start to add or augment their talent with new capabilities constantly. So I think that's the right challenge. And then the other thing I'd suggest is looking to startups, right? Really looking hard at the startups and looking at what methodologies they bring to bear, the edge that they bring, and just using that to go ahead and drive the frequency that big companies have to start to deploy things out to market.
Well, thank you for that excellent toilet paper example. And talent is always a challenge. I want to shift focus here a little bit because it's something that we'll be focusing on through this 3-day conference. Talent is a challenge when it comes to innovation and growth. And how does talent come into play when it comes time to build out the digital strategy, manage the right skill sets? And how can the C-suite take more accountability for digitization?
Yeah, for the next decade. So, the way I would look at this is I don't think that well, let me take a step back. I believe that the technical debt that companies have to deal with, which in a lot of cases is really truly 90% of an IT budget, has to be addressed. And so I think that companies need to rapidly address that by moving as much of that content to public cloud as possible, and then take the dollars that they save from that and reinvest it in modern platforms. And to me, again, the model is pretty simple. It's that trimodal IT. So the platforms they need to get right would be systems of record, systems of interaction, and systems of intelligence. And each one of those should be very purposeful, right? Like you don't want to do a lot of point solutions for AI, because then you'll just end up with the Tower of Babel of AI in your enterprise. So they really should think about it from a platform play. How do they want to do it so that they can deliver that out to the company, regardless of how the company wants to deploy it in the future?
Well, Aaron, thank you for that very granular look at the state of digitization as we've accelerated away from the pandemic. Thank you so much for your time today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So join me on the main stage in a few moments for a conversation with the head of Samsung's display business, who will talk about the next generation of screens that no doubt we will soon be seeing everywhere. I, for one, have seen some of their work, and it's a pretty impressive spectacle.
Over the course of the next 3 days, make sure as well that you take some time to explore the virtual experiences in the lobby, where you can check out our interactive gallery of iconic NFTs or break out your VR headset to venture into the field for some immersive storytelling and networking.
I can't wait to check out the NFTs. And we will see you on the main stage shortly for more on the business of technology.